Welcome everyone to another episode of Alma Ensemble's summer interview series. We've got Sarah Wardle-Jones with us.
Hello.
And Erica Sipes.
Hey.
And I'm Michelle Smith-Johnson, and we're the co-founders of this organization. We're a chamber music collective based in Roanoke, Virginia. So today we are thrilled, beyond thrilled, ecstatic, so pumped to have the incredible pianist Marianne Parker with us today. Hey, Marianne, how are you? How are things in Chicago?
Everybody, I'm doing well. Things are, it's sunny and above 50 degrees today. So for
Nice.
Can't ask for too much more.
That's so nice. It's been so windy here. Like every single day, I couldn't take the dogs walking because it reminded me of Chicago a little bit. Just windy.
Sorry about that.
No.
Yeah, but it's lovely. Yeah, we live in a really nice, spacious neighborhood, and it's can't complain.
Very good. Very good. So it's been wonderful keeping up with you through these years. You and I met in grad school at University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And it's just been, that seems like a lifetime ago, doesn't it?
It sure does.
So you've done so much work in the new music scene, and it's just been really cool to keep up with. But let's start with your latest work. Through New Music Shelf, you recently curated an anthology of new music for solo piano. And huge congratulations. That's incredible. But sort of take us through the process. What inspired this, and how did this all come to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess starting from the beginning, this started with a collaboration with mezzo-soprano new music superstar Megan Enon. So I had met her at a few, different conferences and stayed in touch with her. And she reached out one day and said, "Hey, I've been thinking about you and about a collaboration I think that would be really fun for us to do." And she was among the first batch of curators for the Music Shelf anthologies, which was one for each of the four major voice types. And so I was just thrilled to collaborate with her on her release concert. So the company is New Music Shelf, which was started by Dennis Tobensky, who is a tenor and composer in New York. And so we went, and I think the January of 2019, to give it the official release recital at the National Opera Center. And it was just thrilling. At that point, I made contact with saxophonist composer Alan Tyson, who he kind of nabbed me that night and said, "Hey, can I secure you now to play for my release recital?" He was the curator of the alto sax anthology. And both of them kind of encouraged me to be in conversation with Dennis. He was kind of in the process of expanding these anthologies, and his major goal is to get a first volume for all, I believe, all solo instruments. I don't want to speak for him, but I think that's his goal, and he is just well on his way. And yeah, so we were in conversation, and I was really delighted when he asked me to be the curator for the Volume 1 solo anthology. And from there, he put out a call for scores. It was open, I think, for 2 months, and we received 420 submissions somewhere here from all over the world.
Wow.
Yes, and boy, howdy, that was you all know, call for score, 420. So it was a big job and I was lucky to have this network of curators that had already gone through this to kind of bounce ideas from. So yeah, it was a process over several months, and kind of the first listen through, I listened only, I listened blind, and if something didn't grab me, it didn't make the cut, and that almost cut things exactly in half for the first listen through. And as I started to get it around 1/4 of the original entries, then I started to envision kind of what styles, what difficulty levels I wanted represented, what I thought was needed, because these anthologies have, professional performers in mind, as well as advanced high school, university students, so college studios. So there's kind of a wide area of potential players that I needed to keep in mind when I was choosing my final choices.
Well, that's really great. That makes it accessible to, pianists of all levels, and it's not completely overwhelming to someone who wants to dive into new music,
That's my
but
hope.
feels overwhelmed with that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's as you know, it's not always the most accessible, easy to get into world. So to have this tool at hand as a university professor, or a student that stumbles upon it, I think is huge to have that entry point.
That's so wonderful. And where can you, I was perusing your website, and you can pre-order the anthology through your website. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. So you can head to my website, www.marianneparker, MarianneParker.com. And there's a link to that, which sends you directly to the New Music Shelf website. So newmusicshelf.org.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I need to double check that. But
we'll put a link in the description.
Great. Yeah, so it's available.
Got you. Awesome. That's so great.
So you, in addition to all this work, you also have a really strong passion for chamber music, right?
Absolutely.
That, of course, really resonates with us. We do a lot of chamber music. And you formed your own group, the L&M Duo, with marimbist Laurel Black.
I sure did.
Yeah, so that's super exciting. I was watching some of your videos earlier today. So could you tell us a little bit about that duo, what you focus on, how you got started?
Yeah, definitely. So L&M Duo was, honestly, I think of that as my first foray into both new music and being an entrepreneurial-minded musician. So we were founded in 2016, but Laurel and I actually both went to the University of Tennessee, along with Michelle. She was finishing up her undergrad. She later went to the Boston Conservatory after she graduated, and I was a first-year master's student, so we overlapped. We were kind of in our own worlds as in the piano master program. It was pretty insular largely, and she was busy as well. So time passed. I moved to Chicago. I became the principal pianist for the Civic Orchestra. And, oh yeah, backing up, I also have training in percussion. So I'd studied percussion through high school and actually through my 4th year of undergrad. And I adore marimba, the entire percussion sound world. And I've never really moved away from that. And I was really wanting to find a way to bring percussion back into my world in one way or another. And so I kind of collaborated with a handful of different percussionists that I met through the Civic Orchestra. And all those experiences were wonderful. Everybody kind of had their own trajectory and knew where they were going. So we had these one-off collaborations, which were fun and just made me hungrier for more. So I don't know how the idea came into my head, but I thought, Laura Black, she's doing some chamber things in Boston, and wow, she actually plays piano. We kind of have this weird kind of cross world going. So I reached out to her, and the timing turned out to be perfect for her as well, to consider something like this. So so that's how we got formed, and we kind of hit the ground running. We'd never really done a rehearsal together, and booked our first concert, I think, in the fall of that year. And then booked my flight over there to have our first kind of, like we say, our band camp week of rehearsals. And it was great. Now we're super close friends. We luckily loved playing together. We shared kind of a similar lexicon musically, and we just got along really well musically and personally. So yeah, what was the rest of that question? That's our origin story.
Yeah, that's a really great story, and I love hearing how those kinds of things get started, because it starts with often just like this little germ of an idea, right, and blossoms into something.
Yeah.
And for us, it's been kind of similar. It's cool to look back.
Isn't it? Yeah. It seems almost like unbelievable and magical, like serendipitous. Like, how did all those things fall into place like that?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and so we'd had 3 very active seasons, and commissioning is a big part of our work. I don't know if you want to talk about that more later.
Yeah, actually, we can go ahead and talk about that now, because we were curious because we're starting to do that ourselves, and it's sort of a new world, right? And it's sort of difficult to figure out how do you make those relationships with composers? Do you seek certain people out, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have to figure out a relationship between you and the composer once you've commissioned a work. So how do you all go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question because so we kind of I feel like I have this flow chart in my head with like a handful of different cells in terms of how we've followed the commissions that we have. So our very first commission, we approached a composer whose work I heard at the New Music Gathering, which I don't know if you all have heard of that, but it's just like a new music love fest. So it's kind of like a conference. It's like the unconference. So it's super unpretentious. The focus is on performers, composers, professional development, and just kind of making real life connections. So I heard Rusty Banks's work there for toy piano and electronics and was just blown away. It was such a cool piece. And so I just had in my head that I kind of want to see if you would write a piece for us, maybe with toy piano, maybe some smaller percussion. So I approached Rusty first. We had a phone conversation before he dove into the piece, just for us to get to know each other personally and musically a little bit. So that was our first collaboration. We also each have, you know, great relationships with friends from school and our own networks, which we've fostered. I think, you know, one of my standout favorite projects that we've done was a commission project with my good friend from undergrad, Stephen Snowden. And so, you know, that's just a friend that I've known since I was 18 years old, and we're both doing our own thing in different cities. And so that's another fun way to start these things. And then we've had a handful of composers reach out to us and approach the idea. And we've had 1 or 2 commissions of pieces from composers that initiated. And there's always, you know, there's the conversation about compensation. If the financial means aren't necessarily able to be met, then how can we compensate for that in terms of visibility, performances, things like that. So it's a really malleable relationship.
Yeah, I would agree. And every contract that you draw up they're all different.
Absolutely.
Every single project is completely different than the last. And there's no, I guess, the right template when you're embarking on something like this.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. And I feel like the guiding principle is, you know, respect and trust what the composer asks, and yeah, whatever that is.
Absolutely. So let's talk about your recording. You released your first solo piano album last year. Take us a bit through that creative process and what inspired the project and how you went about doing it.
I would love to talk about that. Yeah. So I released my first album in February of 2019, and it's called Pas Intime, which first lesson learned is probably don't name your album in a foreign language because it'll never be called Pages in Time, which is fine. But so this album features exclusively works by Haitian composers from throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. And how I came to that, I mean, it's unbelievable. I can't believe that I had the opportunity to kind of get to know this set of repertoire that I had never heard of before, and I think so many people hadn't yet known was there. So I work with an ensemble in Chicago called Crossing Borders Music, whose mission is to promote the dignity of all people, all cultures through music. And the founder his first passion was with the people and the music of Haiti, and he's traveled to Haiti every summer, I think, since 2001. So really devoted a significant portion of his life to this music, and he formed Crossing Borders Music based on that passion. So he has a network of scholars, enthusiasts, composers, performers around the world, and there happened to be this scholar named Robert Grenier, who had just finished creating a critical edition of an enormous number of solo piano works, which he received the source scores through this archive that sits in Montreal, Canada. That's a Society for the Research and Diffusion of Haitian Music. So this is the largest archive of Haitian music in the world, which is amazing. So he received,
yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. They do really amazing work. I won't try to say their name in French. So he was searching for a pianist who might be able to put together a recital with some of this music that he'd created the additions for. And he approached Tom. Tom approached me, and I think one or two other pianists. And I immediately, absolutely, I'd done some cello piano duos with Tom. Tom Clues is the founding director of Crossing Borders. So I'd done some Haitian duos with him and just really loved so much about it. What we played had just beautiful, beautiful melodies. It was rhythmically driven. It was just, it was up my alley. So I jumped on the idea. It turns out there's a lot missing from these manuscripts. So a lot of them have aged kind of in humidity and not ideal conditions. So when Robert had come to make these editions, there were some questions and some omissions and some, so we did a lot of work that first winter that I had these scores in my hands. He had sent me the pieces that were most complete. I had played through them and chosen some that really resonated with me. And then we just went back and forth. I'd ask him questions like, okay, so this has D flat here, it's D natural in all these other spots. Do you imagine that this is a typo or was this intentional? Let's work through the harmonics of this to see what might be the intent. Put it
right.
A lot of roadmap issues in terms of, DSs that didn't have a destination. So kind of like just some roadmap conundrums we had to work through. And performative, these hadn't been recorded, had never been performed. Many of them, that's not true for every piece. But it was a really special experience that I don't feel pianists often get.
The album is beautiful. It's tranquil and meditative and contemplative, but also very exciting. I loved it.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. Yeah.
I loved it.
Thank you. I feel like there's a big variety too, from things that are, pretty tonal and romantic to things that kind of push the envelope on tonality.
Absolutely. Yes. 100%. So what advice would you give someone, sort of aside from having, because that takes a lot of time doing all the research and all of the sort of corrections you had to make. We've been in that situation once. Erica, she worked, I don't know how long on one piece. And that was one piece. Anyway, I digress. But what advice would you give someone who wants to go to the studio or create their own album, sort of tips and tricks, if you have any?
So I immediately go to a really logistic place with that. For me, I feel like I got the advice of, because this was my first time in the recording studio, obviously, as a solo player, being the only player and doing something that's this precise. And that said, I had won a grant to do this, and I was only able to afford a certain number of hours in the studio with that grant. So I knew I'd had to work within this time frame. So before I went in, just making sure that I had several different starting points in each of the pieces, so that I didn't kill myself trying to do straight runs and get burned out really fast. I learned that, like, after the first day, let's try like a straight run of this piece and see how it goes. And almost immediately, it's like, okay, no, we have the means to, the technology to make this really what we want. So I think going in prepared in a way that doesn't fray you out emotionally. So prepare your music and have your plan in place well before you go in the studio. And perform the music if you can before you record it. So I think all the pieces I performed in recital at least, a small handful of times, and the interpretation changed dramatically from the first time I played them to when I recorded them, and they've still changed even since I've recorded them. So I think it's important to let pieces mature for a certain amount of time.
No, absolutely. That's really important.
Yeah, and it's always evolving, but, and goodness, what other advice? Go somewhere that has a fantastic setup and instrument. I was lucky. I went to this really fabulous studio in Chicago, Pianoforte Studios, and they just keep really pristine, beautiful instruments, and the staff and the engineer was just above and beyond, made it a fantastic experience for me. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of advice if I were to think more in that.
I have another question too about that. Did you have somebody that listened in with you and served as a listening ear to help give you that feedback that's so hard to give yourself as a performer?
Oh, that's a great question. That's something I if I were to do it again, I would like to. I did not have anybody sitting in the studio with me except for the engineer. I did have the opportunity to play through these pieces for another ear that was familiar with the world of repertoire ahead of time, before going into the studio. But I didn't have that extra ear, and I think it would have been tremendously helpful and made it an even more.
Yeah, I've heard that advice. Somebody just gave that to me. I haven't recorded anything before, but I thought that was really good advice, because she said you have to put so much energy into your performance itself.
Yeah.
That if you have to be that listening ear and making those decisions, it can be just overwhelming too.
Exactly. Yeah, it's another thing that can really fray your brain out prematurely.
Yeah.
I would say that's great advice. I feel like also you have to I would have to get over any little bit of protectiveness or shyness over, the creative process.
Sure. Somebody that you really trust, and
Absolutely.
that you don't feel that sort of embarrassment or
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
That's great. Thank you.
So we've talked quite a bit about your career trajectory. It seems like very multifaceted, and you've also you mentioned briefly your experience as an entrepreneur as well as a musician, which was really interesting to me. Could you share a little bit about some of the biggest surprises that you've experienced on your career journey, and what kind of advice you give to young musicians who are just starting out? I feel like when you're in school and you're 18 years old, the path forward looks often really different than the path that actually becomes, And so I always like to talk to musicians about, their experience with that and what advice they have.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree. I didn't learn much, if any, in school that would have prepared me for that entrepreneurial bent that I took. And it was a long road, and it is continuing to be a long road to forge that. And it's so rewarding. I think the first piece of advice is you have to trust your ideas, and you have to follow through with the ideas that are worth the salt. Because I've been surprised time and time again with these creative ideas that I have. Oh my goodness, sorry about that. Interruption. Epic thought. Yeah, so just getting outside of we're trained to do well in things and follow directions. Of course, we need to do that. But if you have an idea and you think that people are going to value this idea, and if you're passionate about the idea, people are going to rally around it. And for instance, with my duo, with my album, with the chamber music that I've been playing, if you are able to convince people of the value of the art that you're creating, and if you know how to take the steps and put in the work and the sweat to make them happen, then people are going to rally behind you. You're going to find support. You have to mention financial support. So find the means for financial support often if you continue looking. I think that another really interesting thing that I found is that I always think of the saying, I have a mentor whose kind of mantra is a rising tide lifts all boats.
Sure.
And I found time and time again that that's so true. So something that I've really loved doing in the last couple of years is serving, in this kind of curatorial role, not only for the anthologies, which is, helping to serve composers' work. They retain their rights to all the pieces that are in these anthologies. That's a way to promote the work that they do while also promoting my own work. I host and produce a series with New Music Chicago downtown at the Chicago Cultural Center, New Music Chicago Presents. So this is helping to provide a platform for new music groups in Chicago and composers. And just generally collaborating with composers, creating opportunities. I think all of this, if you put it out there, it comes back to you. And that sounds really ethereal, but I've really seen it happen in tangible ways. And another surprising thing is often if you ask for money, if it's a valuable project, you'll receive the money that you need to make that happen. So it's, you know, don't think that you're limited by the few avenues for financial support that you think might exist. You need to get creative about thinking of programming, different non-traditional places to present things, non-traditional sources to fund projects that you have. So you just have to really think outside the box, surround yourself with people that do the same thing, and continue challenging yourself.
100% agree. 1,000% agree to all of that. Outstanding.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know if that was coherent or those are just kind of a random jumbling of thoughts that I have on the topic. But
no, that's wonderful.
I think it's awesome. And I think, you know, it struck me, you said you like believe in your dream, like believe in your ideas. And I think that's so powerful. And it's something that's it's easier said than done, right? It's believing in your ideas.
It's so scary to put them out there for me as well. It's terrifying because there are going to be people that they don't see that for themselves. And so they're going to say that out loud that they, you know, they're going to, and it doesn't reflect on your idea. It reflects on where they're headed. But it's so scary to say what you want to happen, but that's the first step. You have to do it. And it's wonderful when you see the support rally around your ideas because yeah.
So
great.
Can you tell us about one of your most memorable performances, I guess, in the recent past? And it can be memorable in any way.
Yeah, so the one that comes to mind immediately is not solo or chamber, but it was orchestral. It was performing Petrushka with the Civic Orchestra of Chicago, and it was on a concert that also had Thomas Ades's Asila, which, if you haven't listened to it, like the third movement, Ecstasia is, it's so cool. It's amazing. But so performing Petrushka, enormous piece that you just have to, like, your technique has to just view itself from above in order to execute this thing properly. You have to get outside of your body to do it at the tempo that's marked. So then when the conductor takes it 9 clicks faster than that in performance, it's a wild ride.
Nice.
I held on. And it was great. I listened to the recording, you know, I think it was like 2 years after that and it was like, oh, yeah, it was good. It was memorable for that reason. And it's such an outstanding piece to be able to perform. And on Symphony Center stage in Chicago, it's like, what?
That's incredible. That's incredible. I think it's good that you waited for so long to listen back to it, because I think if you listen to a performance like right after, you're in your head so much, it wouldn't have been productive.
That's more advice I would give younger musicians is don't do that, because you're just wallowing in your own like self-critique. So you have to get outside, like wait 6 months at least before you give a full listen.
So do you think you would ever perform that again? If you were asked, what would you say? Would you say, no, I did it once, that was good?
Absolutely, I would.
That's
no,
good.
like I just started gearing myself up, like, okay, when do I yeah, I would.
Okay, so anybody watching this that conducts, an orchestra, you have a pianist right here.
Oh,
there
that's awesome. Okay, so now it's time for our grab bag portion of the interview. Has nothing to do with music, just a lot of fun, random questions for you, Marianne Parker.
Ready.
So
she has her coffee.
The biggest question. Oh, I'm right. Oh, let's go. So the biggest question, and this can come to fisticuffs depending on who you ask. Where do you find the best pizza in Chicago?
Uh-oh.
Many of y'all are from Chicago, right, originally?
No, but I've been there. It's my favorite city in the United States.
Is it? I didn't know that. I love Chicago.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful. Mine too, but I'm not originally from here. So I'm going to say not any of the deep dish places. I will caveat that to say my favorite deep dish is from Lou Malnati.
Oh, okay. It's either Giordano's or Illuminati's.
like there's not
generally.
There's not an either or, but sure, I'll give you that.
Okay.
Keep it nice.
Right.
But I think my favorite pizza is in our neighborhood in Logan Square, and it's Dante's. So they just have these enormous pies that are like, I don't know, like 22 inches, 20 or 22.
Whoa.
And it's like thin crust, I guess, kind of more New York style, but with like the cornmeal on the bottom, and they have one that's like the Italian beef. It's called the Minotaur, I think. And so that's Italian beef and giardiniera, and oh boy, that's up there.
After this interview, you're going to call them and place your order, right?
A little bit.
I think they should give you some free pizza at this point.
Oh yeah,
I'm getting you all these deals from.
You're going to be tagged, yeah. I mean,
we'll tag them.
Have the energy to go hit Petrushka.
All right. So following up, the next question is: if you were stuck on a desert island, what 2 books would you want with you?
Oh, that's so good. Oh man. So I'm generally not a person that likes to reread books. And the exception tends to be with 2 people, and one is Neil Gaiman. I will never say his name correctly. Which one is it? Do you know?
We won't tell him. I don't know what it is.
No.
We won't type in this. So Anansi Boys is, I've read pretty much all of his full-length novels and a lot of his smaller works too. But Anansi Boys, for some reason, that is just the most delightful book, and it's so fantastical, and his sense of humor is just so absurd and like thinly veiled. It's not on the, I just love his writing style, and I think that would be a great companion. So I think Anansi Boys is one. And another, pretty much any book by David Sedaris, but most likely Calypso, just his, I think, second most recent collection of short stories. Man, that guy's just sense of levity and like the way he juxtaposes like the terrible with the hilarious, and like, I don't know, I think that'd be a great point of view to have. They're just so funny. He got his endings right in that book too. I feel like it's really hard to nail endings of stories, and with that book, it's like, oh, you figured it out.
Awesome.
So this one is really an interesting one, I think. If you could live the life of any animal, what would it be and why?
That's a good question too. Not the same as my favorite animal, which don't tell my dog, who's also up there. Favorite animal is actually the snake, which husband has not permitted me to rescue and keep in the house. But wouldn't be fun to live as a snake because many people hate them. That would be frightening. I'd say either a deep sea fish, like something living not so deep down that, I'm not going to overthink this. Yeah, I'm going to say either a fish or like a hawk, a bird. So just getting to either cover so much ground as like a hawk, and specifically a hawk because that's, you know, a bird that's not often preyed upon. So it's nice to have that kind of security here. Weird answer. But a fish.
Different perspectives. That's pretty
yeah, that's very forward thinking.
Yeah, very. Yeah.
Okay, so everybody's at home now, right? So what are you binging on Netflix or any platform right now?
I feel like lately I've just been going to the least stressful shows.
Yeah.
Just the things that are like the Great British Baking Show. I've really been.
Yes.
I love that.
Me too.
Laurel actually introduced me to that show, and it does the trick. So that's been really fun to watch. I've been getting into Black Mirror. And
I watched one episode and I couldn't, the pig episode. I couldn't hang. Couldn't do it.
I don't remember. I don't think I've seen that one, or if it's been a long time, because I started it like 2 years ago and had the same experience. I watched one episode and I was like, whoa, no. And then something brought me back, and then I saw like 3 episodes in a row where it was just like, whoa, this is terrifying ending. So this is great. And I really want to get into this. I like horror and I like supernatural things. It's been a little too dark. I haven't wanted to get into them lately, but I really want to get into the series Marianne, just because I spelled the same as my name.
Yeah,
feels like the right thing to do. That's good.
Right. So well done. I don't know much. Yeah, right. I don't know much about it, but it sounds like a really great horror series. Also Seinfeld.
Oh yes, classic.
Yeah,
perfect.
Definitely. Very good classic. And speaking of classics, what is your favorite kitchen gadget?
Ooh, that's a great question too. I really love, so I'm more of a baker than a cook. My husband tends to be the much better and more creative and reliable cook in the family. So I would either have to say my KitchenAid. That's really come through for me in a lot of ways, a lot of times, or the emulsion blender.
Those are great.
That's on my wish list. Yeah.
It's so satisfying and like stress relieving just to see that thing work, and it's so handy. Yeah.
But it can make a mess. Maybe I use it wrong, but sometimes like it's kind of a scary scene afterwards.
That's been recently, and I realized you have to have enough liquid to cover like the
right.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's a stain. Yeah.
Sarah, don't feel bad. It's on my wish list too. I always take, when I make soup, I always just put it in the blender.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, why don't I buy an immersion blender?
It's so worth it, you guys. Just do it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I'm doing it.
More than an implement.
It's gotta happen. Okay, our last one, this was a tough one, okay? Composer cocktails. So what composer would you have a drink with? And historical or living?
Or living, okay. And there was a second part to that question?
And why?
And why?
Yeah.
Going on the living side of things, and I am fascinated by the work that Gabriella Lena Frank does. And I think I adore her music, and she is such a badass, if I may say, and like just, she gets so much done and is such an example that I would just love to have a cocktail with her and pick her brain. Absolutely.
That's awesome.
I don't think she knows me personally, but
we'll tag her.
We'll tag her. Yeah. Tag her too.
But then instead of a cocktail, I'd rather have like a really nice dry hop lager with her.
There you go.
That works.
Yeah.
There you go. Very good. Well, Marianne, it has been such an awesome time with you today, and we're really thankful that you were able to join us and talk a little music and talk a little food and TV. So again, thank you so much for being with us. You're so inspiring. Keep doing you and get it.
Man,
so good.
Right back at you. I'm just so happy to do this. So thank you so much for thinking of me and for taking the time to do this today and planning those wonderful questions.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, we will talk soon and be in touch.
Sounds great. Thanks, ladies.
Right. Bye.
Bye.